Hello viewers, welcome to another exciting and educative edition of AAU Talks. With me in the studio is Professor Samuel Anim. He is the Director of the Directorate of Research, Innovation and Consultancy at the University of Cape Coast. He is an Associate Professor in Economics, and today we are going to discuss one of the hot topics in academia, research, communication and commercialization. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you, Samuel.
Yeah, Prof, it's been a while.
It has been.
Yes.
Working in Cape Coast is daunting.
Yeah, sure. Working in Cape Coast is daunting. And as a graduate student in Cape Coast, it's really, really difficult. Prof, why focus on research, communication, and commercialization?
Thank you, Samuel. And let me start by saying that AAU has chosen, as you rightly said, an area that is not only contemporary, but it's a route to our development as a continent. Yes. And on that note, I commend AAU for taking the initiative to speak on this subject.
Yes.
On why focusing on research, commercialization, and communication, it's important to appreciate the sequence. In your submission, you talked about communication and commercialization, and to draw viewers' attention of the need for sequence, we should know that the word communication is a two-way affair, which simply means that somebody is saying something and another person has to be heard.
Yes.
On the corridors of different institutions, typically the industry, the academic institutions, and on the corridors of policymakers, there has always been that extent of disgruntlement on disconnection between what researchers are doing and what industry players need, and on the other hand, what researchers are doing and what policymakers really need. Yes. And we've not taken the pain to investigate the reasons why there's that disconnect. And that calls in for this conversation to ask ourselves, why is it that researchers are publishing, but policymakers and industry players in Africa continue to argue that there is that disconnect? Anecdotally, there could be the possibility that our traditional mandate as universities has evolved without we realizing the evolution that has taken place and taking the necessary steps. I'll give you one typical reason that I personally think is the underlying reason for the disconnect.
Yes.
Our basic research tells us that there are two types, one that is very basic, which is just advancing the frontiers of knowledge, and the other which is applied. And if you speak to academics, they'll tell us that we are principally established to function more in the domain of advancing the frontiers of knowledge. But with the evolution of challenges around the world, especially if you look at the SDGs, it should not end with advancing the frontiers of knowledge. It should go more into solving specific issues as has been outlined by the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2063 for Africa. So in this respect, we need to find that connection between basic research and applied research. It is that understanding that I don't think has reached the front of academics as well as industry players for us to strike that balance. I don't think the discussion from the perspective of academics should be either basic research or applied research. We should have that mix. And what I mean by that mix is that universities should consciously take steps to ensure that some aspects of their work or their intervention is meeting the needs of industry. And on the other side, industry players should also appreciate the need for basic research to complement the needed applied research that would go directly to solve their problems.
Okay, Prof. So, not cutting you short, but then our viewers would like to know the meaning, or if you could give us the intuition behind basic research and then the applied research. What does it mean? Because not all our viewers are within the academia circles. Some people are not much abreast with the information that you are given. So basic and applied research.
The fundamental difference is pretty straightforward. Basic research is simply advancing the frontiers of what we know about the world in which we exist.
Yes.
It's just an unsolicited kind of research for us to understand the environment within which we live and provide much more meaning of things that surrounds us. It is not intended to solve a particular industry problem, which is the case for applied research. So applied research is tailored to address the needs of a particular challenge that we have within our society, i.e. a problem that an industry is facing.
Okay,
so that is the fundamental difference.
Okay. So Prof, what's the kind of research that our universities in Ghana are doing? Is it basic or applied?
Again, this is a very sensitive question and it has to be responded to in a very particular way. Simply because I've not done any study to say that about 100% are basic and 20% are applied. But basically the way we run our universities are such that researchers in this part of the world do unsolicited research.
Yes.
So when you are doing research, you need to ask yourself, what kind of research am I doing? If it is unsolicited and you sit in your room in the university and say that this is what I want to put out there, it might not meet the needs of industry.
Yes.
Another type of research is what we call the research grant, the solicited research or the research contract. This is where somebody says that these are the things that are happening in contemporary times. So let's draw the attention of researchers to begin to focus on these areas. Okay. So normally you get foundations to sponsor academics to do research in this area. That is what we call research grant. Yeah. In that respect, is not necessarily to solve an industry problem. The other flip side is what we call the research grant, the research contract,
yes.
Which is a solicited funded type of research, so that industries will be funding you to put your research skills, research expertise into use to help solve a particular research problem.
All right, thank you, Prof. So, Prof, like you mentioned, you rightly mentioned, I undertake a research, an applied research, as a researcher, as an academia, as a graduate student. And how do I communicate this to the public so that an industry picks it up and then implements? How do I do this communication?
The way the communication should be done should be tied to when the communication has to be done and the processes that one has to go through in doing that kind of research. Again, one of the issues on the corridors of industry and academic institution is that all the theses are on the shelf and they are not being used.
Yes.
And this is precisely why I say how we do it.
Yes.
We develop our research topics on our own without consultation with the industry players. So if you're a graduate student and you are following what your supervisor has been doing in the past, and you say that, for instance, he's been researching into poverty, so for that reason, I want to go into poverty. That area of poverty might not fit into the development policy framework of the country. So in that instance, once you do it, it's going to remain on the shelf. Yes. And it's likely to be treated as basic research to advance the frontiers of knowledge rather than being treated as an applied research which would have direct use for industry. Okay,
Prof. So what about the other side of the coin? I do my research, I publish it, but the people who need to read this, the industry, do not get to read it because it's somewhere in a journal where someone will have to pay to access it.
Again, this brings us into the domain of research visibility and access to what we are publishing.
Yes.
And as a global academic community, there has been a lot of evolution lately in terms of access to research findings and what academics would need to progress. So in a number of universities in Ghana, it's an issue of the number of publications that you have, yes, and that will be the basis for which you are going to progress. Okay. Whereas in other places, it's an issue of how visible are your research outcomes. And that will be measured by one of the indicators is people who have access to your work.
Yes.
But before we get into those details, let's appreciate the fundamentals. There are instances where the initiative should come from the academic institution, and there are instances where the initiative should come from the industry players or the policy makers.
Yes.
Let us not get into the discussion on why should the policy maker sit down for the academic to send his research findings to. There should be some proactiveness on either side of the coin, either yes, from the side of the industry player, the policy maker on one side, or from the academic institution on the other side. This proactiveness will call for a rethinking of how we package our research findings. So normally in the universities, we do our research work and we end with policy recommendations. And again, this is coming from my own experience as the director of research, where I get colleagues to think about the need to transform their policy recommendations into a news brief or a policy brief. And I might be wrong, but there is that tendency to say that our capacity to write policy briefs has not been given careful attention, where researchers will go into the frame of mind to ask ourselves, how feasible are our recommendations? And the issue of feasibility is very important from different dimensions. From cost dimension, it might not be feasible. From a political dimension, it might not be feasible. From a timing dimension, it might not be feasible. So although you might come out with sound scientific recommendations, the feasibility of that would have to be captured in a policy implications framework,
yes.
in which case then the industry player or the policy maker would assess whether I have to go in for this or another option. Another thing that we are doing in the universities, which I'm happy to talk about on this
yes.
platform, is that a lot of researchers are bringing out information that is not necessarily needed by the industry players.
Yeah.
As an investor, the key question is about, if I invest X amount of money in an intervention, what do I get in return? The research that we find coming out is at the basic level of hypothesis, which on every platform that I get, I speak about it, in the sense that every policymaker knows about relationship between variables.
Yes.
What policymakers do not know is, if I invest 20%, what do I get in return? And what I get in return, will it suffice for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? There are exact pieces of information that policymakers would want. But there is that tendency, as I said, I might be wrong, that what we are doing at the moment is giving us a broad-based information which are not actionable, in which case policymakers are a bit reluctant in taking in that. On the other side, this information is not privy to academics, yes, of what industry players and policymakers are aware of, for which reason they go on to do research in an area that they think it will be relevant. Yes. So there is the need for some coordination, harmonization to bring policymakers, industry players, and academics together to iron out processes by which regularly we will know the capacity of academics and we will know the needs of industry players. Then we can integrate these two things and come out with something that will be useful.
Okay, Prof. So I understand that integrating this brings about commercialization of the research. So why do we commercialize research?
We commercialize research, again, if you go back to think about why we do research and evolutions that are taking place in recent times. So let us all understand the basic reason why we do research are two, as I said earlier,
yes,
on: to advance the frontiers of knowledge and to transform lives. Initially, you can see them as two distinct reasons, but really these are reasons that do overlap. Even if you are doing research for the basis of advancing the frontiers of knowledge, for us to understand what is happening around us, the ultimate goal, which might not be immediate,
yes,
is that it should lead to transformation of lives, and it should lead to securing the future of the next future generations. So if you appreciate these two reasons, then the word commercialization comes to play, in the sense that it should get to the end user. The research that we are doing should get to the end user. So that is on the front of why we do research, why we need to commercialize. The second reason why we need to commercialize is, as I said, evolutions in recent times. Spending to academic institutions are declining. And personally, I say to my audience that the problem is not only about the decline, the problem is about the unpredictability.
Yes. And
And what I mean by the unpredictability is that you are not too sure when the government will say that I'm reducing it by this percentage, or which component I'm resisting funding moving forward. And in Ghana, this is happening given that Parliament is still considering fees for universities, yes, for the last 1 year. And universities, public universities, have not had the opportunity to review it. So nobody is too sure what the government is going to do as far as funding is concerned. So universities would have to rethink how to make money to sustain key interventions in the university. And if you go on the campuses of a number of public universities in Ghana, you see get fund projects that have stalled just because of funding issues.
From the government.
So, yes. And unfortunately, universities are thinking about commercialization from an internally generated funds point of view,
okay,
rather than a research commercialization point of view. So what AAU is doing is helping universities to think about a paradigm shift in terms of the sources of funds.
Yes.
Moving away from other sources of funds to sources of funds that are more sustainable. So now, if you look at the number of universities, for both public and private, one of the major sources of income is student enrollment. This is a source that is definitely not sustainable given the evolution of universities that we have. In this country, we are still counting and we are close to 100.
Yes.
Public and private universities.
Yes.
And we're still counting in terms of the reduction in the number of student enrollment. Other sources of making money has to do with lecturers commercializing their lecture notes. As to whether the processes that we are following is helping advancing knowledge or not is another issue for discussion.
Yes.
Another area that universities are making money instead of research commercialization is engaging in consultancy. Again, it begs the question as in whether the consultancy that they are doing is tied to their research interest or is consultancy because they find themselves in the university. So the issue of research commercialization has to be pursued with some level of aggression, because momentarily we are not too sure how we can fund ourselves for those of us in the public universities.
Yes.
And for those in the private universities, given that student enrollments are declining, we are not too sure of their sustainability. And already we have pieces of information out there on the sustainability of private universities across the continent. So research commercialization is the way to go.
All right. Thank you, Prof. So for those who just joined us, we are talking about research commercialization and communication. And Prof has talked much about the two basic types of research, which is the applied and the basic research. So we'll be going on a commercial break and we will discuss more, or we'll dive more into the mandates of the government and the universities when it comes to research commercialization. Stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Adeline Adi, Project Officer responsible for the Management Development Training Workshops here at the Association of African Universities, Accra, Ghana. Today I would like to introduce to you our Management Development Training Workshops, which we call MADEV in short. The workshops are targeted at middle-level managers of our universities, so that includes heads of department, deans of faculties, deputy vice chancellors, registrars, bursars, and anyone who aspires to any of these positions. We have a workshop coming up very soon and would be holding in Nairobi, Kenya. It will focus on staff development, staff recruitment, staff retention, and staff motivation issues. The workshop will be facilitated by Professor Pascal Mio, former Executive Director of the Organization for Social Science Research in Africa. Participants would have to pay $500 per head. Participants from Kenya will be paying $300 per head. The workshop will be holding from the 26th to the 29th of June 2018. We are calling out to all our members and anyone who is eligible for this workshop, even if you are not in an AAU member institution, to register for this all-important event. You can register online via our website at blog.aau.org. We are looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you and bye.
International University, you are the trust that lies above it.
Welcome back to AAU Talks. Today, I'm discussing the topic, Research, Communication, and Commercialization with Professor Samuel Kwabena Anim. He is the Director of the Directorate of Research, Communication, and Innovation. We've touched on a lot of points when it comes to research communication. We've talked about the need for research communication and commercialization, and also touched the basics of research, whether we are doing applied research or basic research. We are going to dive in the next discussion, which will be tackling the mandate of government and the universities when it comes to research communication and commercialization. Prof, we are back.
Yes.
So in the discussion, you made mention of the fact that funds is highly unpredictable when it comes to research in our universities. And then you made mention of how universities raise funds and all that. Now let's talk about the fact that what's the mandate with the university when it comes to research commercialization, and as the director of Drake at the UCC, what are some of the things that you do in order to commercialize research and in the university?
Thank you again, Samuel. In terms of the mandate on research commercialization, it's important we step back to think about the original mandate of universities and see where we place research commercialization.
Yes.
For a number of universities, their mandates are three pronged. They think about teaching, they think about research broadly, not necessarily research commercialization, and they focus on what some universities call community engagement services, others called extension services, and others would call outreach.
Yes.
Why I said we should step back is that if you don't place research commercialization in the appropriate context, you wouldn't be able to harness it fully. And it's important that of these three core mandates that I've mentioned as the mandates for university, the pivotal of these three is research. If you do good research, it should inform your teaching. And if you do good research, it should inform your outreach, your community engagement.
Yes.
But in most instances, we say these things as in passing without paying attention to how we can get research to inform our teaching and get research to inform community service. So in this context, if you think about research commercialization, then you think about research commercialization from three perspectives.
Yes.
Rather than thinking about research commercialization as an activity or as a mandate that should fall under only research, or it should be an added mandate. My position is that if you think about the process very well in terms of how research should be commercialized, then you can have strands of it falling under teaching, another strand falling under research, and the third strand falling under outreach.
Okay.
For purposes of this discussion and in the interest of time, I'll put emphasis on the third dimension, which has to do with community services.
Yes, Prof.
Literally, this is an area that we've subjectively defined in different universities. But across all, the subjective definition has to do with the issue of making your research beneficial to the community that you serve. And some people have interpreted it as immediate community rather than community in general. But the bottom line is that make your research relevant. Let's see the benefits of it.
Yes.
So the whole idea under research commercialization is that if somebody is benefiting from what you are doing, use that intellect to make money out of it. That is the simple story.
Sure.
So research commercialization, again, is simply saying that if somebody is benefiting, either based on teaching, which is underscored by a research, based on a research contract, which is also underscored by research, or based by a community service, then that person should reward you for what you are doing, because you have intellectual resources that you are transforming into intellectual assets. It becomes your property, and once it becomes your property, then you should get the returns for it. And individuals benefit, and the university also gets to benefit, because during the period that you've harnessed your intellectual resources and transformed them into assets, properties, and you've put a value on them, you are a bona fide property of the university.
Yes.
So there should be a mechanism by which the university will benefit, and the researcher would also go to benefit.
Okay, Prof. Prof, You mentioned the community engagement and the need for research to reflect on the community. In your work at Drake, what has been the success when it comes to community benefiting from the work of Drake?
There are a number of evidence to show how we are taking our research to the public, and that is an initiative that one would want to commend the University of Cape Coast for, as new things that are happening by way of getting our research to the community. I'll give you a number of examples.
Yes.
In the past few years, what we've done as a university is to institute a mechanism where those who are doing innovative research, we give them the platform. We get the media there, we get the industry players there to come and sit around the table for us to share the findings. And for the past 3 years, we've been doing that on an annual basis.
Oh, okay.
In another respect, what we've done is, as a university, is giving money to researchers through support grants and telling them that do research that are relevant to industry. Indeed, one of the specific categories, we have 4 categories. One of the specific categories has the name policy.
Okay.
And what that means is that before you even develop the idea, it should be demand driven. So go out there, speak to industry players, speak to policymakers, let them tell you that, and it should be in writing, it should come to our office, it should be part of the assessment. Let them tell us that this is the problem and we want you to invest money in it.
Okay.
As a university, we've not had the opportunity on a large scale to give them funding to do the relevant research that will push the economy forward. But the whole idea is that we are using that as a platform, as a seed money, for some of these researchers to go on in smaller geographical areas and use that as basis to attract funding to give it a national and continental reflection.
Okay.
Indeed, the most recent one that we did in this area was the Commander Sugar Factory that has attracted a lot of political concerns, and we wanted to find out whether we have the supply stocks to feed the factory.
That was even the next question I was going to ask, because I was going to ask what has been the linkage between Drake and then the industry. Yes, Drake has been doing the research, has been communicating the research, but has it been commercialized? So you can tell us about the Commander Sugar Factory story.
Yes. So from the Commander Sugar Factory point of view, it was not that kind of research that came out with a tool to allow us to commercialize. We should also appreciate what can be commercialized and what cannot be commercialized. It's not all research that we can put value on. It's not all research that would end up in an intellectual property. Some research are supposed to give us the basis for us to rethink how we can use technology and tools to reform the way we do things. So for that particular one, that was not the intention. As I said, it was just to give us a sense of whether we have enough supply stock for the factory.
Okay.
Coming to think about what we've commercialized as a university, or broadly what has been commercialized on the African continent, is pretty much minimal. And this is something that hopefully we're going to go in later in our discussion. Universities have not positioned themselves to commercialize their research. Before you commercialize your research, there are a number of things that has to take place. One of them, there should be that conscious attempt to put in the structures to commercialize. A typical example is, it's not all universities in Africa that have research offices to do the administrative part that will help you to commercialize. And now the onus is on scientists to think about how to commercialize. That is not the responsibility of scientists. In universities that have research offices, they are pretty new. For instance, in the University of Cape Coast, we've had ours within the last 5 years. The same for University of Ghana, not that long. And the same for Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. And as I indicated, there are quite a number of universities that do not have research offices. But the bottom line is that even when you have the research offices, the research commercialization mandate should be seen clearly incorporated in the functioning of the research office. And one way to see that is whether the research office has a patents office. Whether the research office has an intellectual property policy, whether the research office has an innovation policy, whether the research office has a commercialization policy. These are tools that would make a university commercialize its research. So a number of researchers in Africa have patents in their names as collaborators, but not as people leading the process. So they don't have the rights to it. all of them have it, but with collaborators in foreign countries, and they hold the rights to it.
Yeah, Prof, can you come again? Can you explain it further for our listeners to understand more?
So,
yes,
once you are thinking about turning your intellectual resources into an intellectual property,
yes,
this is a legal process.
yes.
So, as a university, there should be an intellectual property policy. And that intellectual property policy would be seated under the umbrella of the nation's intellectual property policy.
Yes.
So, within the university, there should be that decision on who owns the intellectual property.
Yes.
And because most universities in Ghana either recently had their intellectual property policy or do not have it at all, they've not been able to patent what they do.
Okay.
And a number of inventions are coming up, but we've not been able to follow them up because scientists have found that procedure too cumbersome.
Yes.
And that is what has brought in the issue of the role of a research office. The scientist's role is to think about the invention, and the role of the research office is to take that process forward,
yes,
whereby we can commercialize it. So here it's very important to appreciate the distinction between what an invention is and what an innovation is. Invention is part of the innovation process. And in addition to invention is the commercialization. So
that's
innovation
when,
has two components.
Excellent.
Yes. So there are two components. One component that has to do with invention, and another component that has to do with commercialization. Indeed, you can take the discussion forward and say that invention that has not been protected will not be successful with commercialization. Because what that means is that immediately that invention is out there, within a few years, another person can take it up because you've not protected it and begin to make use of it. So really, innovation would be an intellectual property. It means the invention that you've sought protection for it, and commercialization.
Okay.
And these are the things that, in my view, universities are yet to appreciate how it works, and the structures that needs to be put in place, the policies that needs to be put in place to help it function.
Okay, Prof. So, Prof, I'm a graduate student, so I understand the mobile money concept actually came from a graduate student from Kenya. So I'm a graduate student, right? And then I undertake a research, a very innovative one. Do I communicate it or seek for patent before I communicate it? Or even how do I even commercialize it?
I must indicate that this is one of the sensitive issues in the process, and sequencing is very important in the process of turning research findings into commercialization.
Yes.
And it's one of the things that, if I want to go on and on, I would be going on and on. The reason being that as graduate student, you are quick to finish.
Yes.
So once you get your thesis ready, now in most universities, you need to put it out there into the institutional repository.
Yes.
Once it gets into the institutional repository, that information is out there.
Yes.
And once it's out there, it limits your chances of putting it, because one of the conditions for patenting is to step back a year back and say that, has this information been published? Because it has some issues that it needs to satisfy. One of them is novelty. Even on the part of academics, we are not able to go to the full length of patenting and commercializing our findings because of the drift between academic progression, promotion, and researcher progression. Let me say that again. Researcher promotion and academic progression. If we sit in the university, all that we think about is the matrix that we need to follow to become professors. And the matrix has to do with how many publications do I have. So immediately I get one publication, I tell university authorities I have it. I put it out there for everybody to read it so that I get ownership of it. We don't take our time to say that, how do I keep it as a secret? All this discussion about intellectual property commercialization has to do with secrecy and protection.
Yes.
And there's that time lapse between what an academic would want to do immediately and what the patenting process would take a researcher through.
Yes.
We don't have that patience for it, because what we are thinking about is academic progression. So the first thing you need to do, if you think you've come out with something that has the potential of it being patented, the first thing you need to do is hold it to your chest.
At the expense of my promotion?
I'm going to come to that because a number of people see this as a trade-off. I don't see that. I see it's a win-win scenario. And I'm going to explain why I say that. But what I mean by hold it to your chest is not to hold it to your chest forever, because the process is also time-bound. But hold it to your chest and follow the due process.
Okay.
So if you're in a university that has a research office, you go to the person responsible for it, they're going to file it, get experts to think through it, and within 2 weeks, in the context of university, it would quickly be processed by getting it to the national office.
Okay.
And our intellectual property policy spells this out clearly, because I know a number of people would have concerns that the bureaucracy might delay.
Yes.
So once you go through the process and it's protected, nobody stops you from publishing it.
Okay. So the protection is sought at the national level.
It's sought at the national level.
Yes.
And again, it's sought within the jurisdiction within which you want to protect whatever invention that you want to put out there.
Okay.
But let me go back and explain what I mean by it's a win-win scenario, because this is an issue where it comes up a lot.
Yes.
And it's because our framework for academic progression is not tied to researcher promotion.
Promotion, yes.
You understand? So typically what academics would have to do to get promoted in the university is to think about number of publications.
Yes.
And one of the issues that I'm personally advocating anytime I get a platform is what stops university from expanding that frame of thinking, for us to begin to think about what weight do you place on somebody who has made an attempt to protect a potential invention, or somebody who has gone the full scale. In any case, it's going to take the person between the day he or she finds it and a maximum 3 months to get it protected or to file the protection date. Again, that depends on where you find yourself anyway. But it's not a lengthy process. So this 3 months window, once I've made that attempt, it could be factored in the process of promotion. So it makes it a win-win scenario. I protect it, I get weight for my promotion, and there's that potential of commercializing it for the university to get financial resources, and of course for the researcher to also get financial resources.
Okay, Prof. So you made mention of the fact that you sought the protection is sorted from the government or at the national level,
or the jurisdiction within which you want to seek the
So what is
protection.
looking at the mandate of AAU, what is the government of Africa doing? What's their mandate when it comes to protecting people's research or making commercializing research?
I'll be in the position to speak to this based on what is happening in Ghana. I cannot speak to other jurisdictions, but I'll go ahead to make a couple of comments on what I think AAU can do in this respect.
Sure.
Fundamentally, what is happening in a number of African countries, in which case Ghana is one of it, is the non-presence of a national research office. So although we have some offices that I would say would have quasi-responsibility to drive national level research agenda, in contrast to other countries like South Africa, the UK, the US, and obviously in most developed countries where they have national research offices. In a number of African countries, we don't have national research offices. And unfortunately, our understanding and appreciation for the role of a national research office has been misconstrued to mean a national research fund or a council that is responsible for scientific and industrial technology. A council that is responsible for scientific and industrial technology is not a national research office. The role of a national research office is more encompassing and directed towards coordination of different aspects of research. And National Research Fund is just one domain of it. And that is why in Ghana people are saying that convert the book and research allowances that lecturers are getting as basis for us to think about a national research office. It is a misplaced argument. As I indicated, what a national research office should do, one of them, indeed the principal one, is to itemize needs of industry, create that framework by which academics are going to get access to that information, create a portfolio of policy findings from academic institutions, from either basic research or applied research, set this platform up where all these needed stakeholders, that is policymakers, industry players, and academics, would always tap into it and find a way of finding where the synergies are, where the connections are.
Wow.
And that is what a National Research Office, or one of the key functions of a National Research Office. A National Research Office will drive the agenda for industry-funded research, will drive the agenda for the establishment of industry chairs in universities. These things have nothing to do with research funding or a council that is responsible for scientific and industrial research.
Yes.
But as I indicated, there is some misconception on how a National Research Office should behave. In a nutshell, the government has a key role to play in this conversation. If industry players are to listen to universities, they need that backing of a government who will serve as a quality check. I always ask my audience one simple question. Is the government even aware of the human capacity gaps in African countries? Can the government say that we have 10 economists and we need 100 economists? Can the government say the same for other professions? This is what the National Research Office should do, because it's dealing with the academic capacity of our higher learning institutions and what the government needs. So universities will keep on producing economists irrespective of what we need, agriculturists irrespective of what we need. So there's always that mismatch between what is needed for the country and what academics would continue to put out there.
Wow. Prof, you've really given a very lengthy information, and then I hope our policymakers who are listening to us will pick up the substance that you have given or the information that you have given and initiate them. But let's bring this home. What are the steps that a researcher can take to initiate a commercialization or to communicate his research to the public?
Okay. Let me step back again by revisiting the earlier question that you asked in terms of the role of AAU in this discussion. So one of the recommendations that are coming up from the engagement with AAU is the need to take this conversation to another level. Where we're going to bring the policymakers and the head of academic institutions to sit down and have this conversation. As I indicated, in Africa is more of a paradigm shift.
Yes.
Where we're going to see research commercialization as entrenched in the 3 core mandates of the university. And I call it a paradigm shift because it's not our usual way of doing things. Public universities see themselves as producing a public good. So we need to demystify that, given that government funding is dwindling. And this is why AAU would have to bring them to the table to tell them that this 10% reduction is not helping us buy this equipment. So even when we do a groundbreaking research and we take it out there for verification, they ask us what equipment did we use. Once we say we used an obsolete equipment, the research findings will not even be considered. And as I indicated, for private universities, it's also dwindling in terms of number of students. So their main source of income, it's also down the hill. So there is every reason for policymakers and vice chancellors of higher academic institutions to sit around the table for this mindset to change. And as I said, currently higher learning institutions are getting into areas of commercialization that is not really helpful. For instance, if universities are doing buying and selling in commodities in the name of raising money, it's more of a mission drift. Whatever commercialization that we do in universities should be tied to research.
Okay. All right.
In terms of what researchers would have to do to take the process forward, as I indicated, scientists are not meant to take the commercialization forward.
Yes.
Scientists are meant to do the invention. And the role of research administrators are supposed to help the scientists to commercialize it. Or let me put it differently and in the right sense, scientists would have to use the services of research offices to do the commercialization. So to put your question in a context, the issue would be how universities are supposed to position themselves to practically engage with research commercialization. And what I mean by that is ask themselves whether their mindsets have changed. whether they have the right structures. I talked about research offices,
Yes.
whether they have the right policies. The intellectual property policy, the commercialization policy, the innovation policy. These are documents that are contractually binding to take the commercialization process forward.
Oh. Thank you, Prof. Prof, sorry to take you back, but then I want you to give us your final, your very final remarks when it comes to commercialization and communication of research in Africa.
So my final remark is that commercialization of research in Africa has not gained the needed attention at all levels by researchers. Is not our primary goal. Our primary goal is to publish and progress academically. By universities, we focus on what government is doing for us and student enrollment, so we are not focusing on commercializing our research output. At the national level, as I indicated, government commitment is non-existent by the fact that they don't have national research offices. There is the need for us to engage in this conversation, and as I indicated, to have a change in our mindset on what would bring us short-term funds as universities and what would bring us long-term funds as university. And my concluding remark is that student enrollment, given the competition, doesn't have that niche, and the only way universities will survive in the next decade and more is when we change our minds and we commercialize what our intellectual resources would enable us to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you for the time that you've spent with us in this office, in this studio, and also the information that you've passed through our studio to our viewers. Thank you, Prof.
Pleasure is mine.
Sure.
Thank you.
So, viewers, if you were with us through the discussion, we've made mention of the need for research communication and commercialization, and then we've talked about the mandate of the universities and the government when it comes to commercializing and communicating research to the public. And then also we've also talked about the need to sync research with the industry. It's become very prudent for our policymakers to know the need for research and how to also commercialize, how to help institutions to commercialize research. Thank you for being with us, and we hope to see you the next AAU Talks program. Thank you.